Imagine a bomber flying high above Nazi-occupied Europe in the middle of World War II. Flak bursts fill the sky like deadly black flowers, and swarms of German fighters circle like wolves ready to strike. Most aircraft in this situation would be torn apart after just a few hits, but not the B-17 Flying Fortress. Again and again, stories emerged of these massive bombers limping back to England with gaping holes in their wings, shredded fuselages, missing engines, and even entire tails nearly blown away. And yet, somehow, they kept flying. This reputation for toughness earned the B-17 a legendary status that no other bomber of its era could quite match. But why? Why was the B-17 able to take more punishment than almost any other bomber of World War II? Let's dive into the story. The Boeing B-17 was not just a bomber, it was a symbol. Introduced in the 1930s, it was designed for one purpose: to deliver a heavy payload of bombs deep into enemy territory while surviving whatever the enemy threw at it. Unlike sleek fighters, the B-17 wasn't built for speed or maneuverability. Instead, its designers focused on ruggedness, defensive firepower, and the ability to absorb incredible amounts of damage. The result was an aircraft that lived up to its nickname, the Flying Fortress. One of the biggest reasons for the B-17's toughness was its structural design. The aircraft was built with an exceptionally strong airframe, using a robust framework of spars, ribs, and bulkheads that distributed stress throughout the aircraft. This meant that even if large sections of the plane were blown apart by flak or gunfire, the remaining structure could often still hold together. Many bombers of the era had weaker frames that collapsed once critical parts were damaged. But the B-17's skeleton acted almost like armor, keeping it in the air long after other planes would have broken apart. Another key feature was the placement of its four engines. Each B-17 carried four Wright R-1820 radial engines, spaced out across its broad wings. Unlike a twin-engine bomber, which might be doomed if it lost just one engine, the B-17 could keep flying on two, and in some cases even one. There are incredible stories of B-17s crossing the English Channel with three engines knocked out, their propellers feathered, still dragging themselves home. The redundancy of four engines gave the B-17 a massive advantage in survivability compared to bombers like the British Avro Lancaster or the American B-24 Liberator. But toughness wasn't just about the frame and the engines, it was also about defense. The B-17 bristled with machine guns. Early versions carried around 7. But by the later models, the aircraft could have up to 13. 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted in almost every direction: nose, tail, top, bottom, and sides. Enemy fighters attacking a formation of B-17s weren't just facing one bomber, they were flying into overlapping fields of fire from dozens, sometimes hundreds, of heavy machine guns. This defensive network not only protected the planes but also gave crews a fighting chance to survive long enough to return home, even after sustaining damage. Perhaps most remarkable of all were the stories of just how much punishment a B-17 could take and still fly. There were bombers that returned with their noses blown off, leaving crewmen clinging to oxygen masks and wind blasting through the cockpit. Others made it back with massive holes ripped through the fuselage, wings shredded by cannon shells, and control cables nearly severed. One particularly famous B-17, nicknamed All-American, collided midair with another bomber over North Africa. The tail section was nearly severed, hanging on by just a few thin pieces of metal. Yet the plane not only stayed airborne but landed safely. Stories like these spread quickly, building the B-17's reputation as an indestructible fortress of the skies. Now, to really understand why the B-17 stood out, it helps to compare it to other bombers of the time. Take the B-24 Liberator, for instance. On paper, the B-24 could carry more bombs and fly longer distances than the B-17. But the trade-off was that the B-24 had a much weaker structure. Its lightweight design made it faster and more efficient, but it also meant that a few well-placed hits could tear it apart. Pilots often joked that the B-24 was a flying coffin compared to the B-17's fortress-like strength. Similarly, the British Lancaster was a superb night bomber, capable of carrying the enormous Grand Slam bombs that no B-17 could lift. But the Lancaster's lighter construction and lack of heavy defensive guns made it far more vulnerable in daylight raids. There was also a psychological element at play. Aircrews trusted the B-17. Men who flew these bombers knew that if something went wrong over enemy territory, their best chance of survival was being inside a flying fortress. This trust was not misplaced. The B-17's ability to bring crews home even when crippled was unmatched. That morale boost was invaluable in the brutal world of daylight bombing raids, where casualty rates often soared above 25%. Simply knowing your aircraft had a chance of surviving was enough to keep men climbing back in, mission after mission. Of course, the B-17 was not invincible. Thousands were shot down over Europe, victims of relentless German flak and fighters. Entire formations could be decimated on particularly dangerous missions. But what set the B-17 apart was that when damage was survivable, the bomber gave its crew every possible chance to make it home. Many crews lived to tell the tale specifically because of the ruggedness of their aircraft. Even German pilots and commanders recognized the toughness of the B-17. Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler once described shooting at a B-17 until his guns were nearly empty, only to watch in frustration as the bomber kept flying, battered but not beaten. This toughness forced the Germans to commit more fighters, more ammunition, and more resources to try and bring down each bomber, a costly effort that strained their already overextended air force. By the end of the war, the B-17 had cemented its place in history. It wasn't the biggest bomber, or the fastest, or the one with the largest payload. But it was the bomber that aircrews trusted with their lives. The one that could limp back across the channel on fire, riddled with bullets, and missing chunks of its frame. For many men, the difference between life and death came down to being inside a flying fortress rather than anything else. The legend of the B-17 lives on because of its resilience. Museums today display battered remnants of these bombers, scars of flak and cannon fire still visible on their frames, reminding us of the extraordinary challenges they overcame. For those who flew them, the B-17 was not just a machine of war, it was a lifeline, a guardian, and often, a miracle maker. So, why could the B-17 take more damage than any other bomber? The answer lies in its strong structure, its four engines, its heavy defenses, and the spirit of its crews who pushed it beyond the limits of what most planes could endure. The B-17 wasn't indestructible, but time and again, it came close enough to earn its legendary reputation as the toughest bomber of the Second World War.